Hi there. Richard Smoley provides a very good and very accurate schema of mysticism and the occult in his video for the American Theosophy Society, or his lecture for the American Theosophy Society, a link of which is posted below. And he presents an interesting scheme. He presents occultism and mysticism as being on a continuum. With mysticism at one end of the continuum and occultism at the other. And his term for occultism is very wide-reaching. So I have added a few of my own categories as well along this continuum. Now, the important thing here is that I haven't displayed this continuum as a top-down, saying that that's upper, higher, and that's lower. Neither have I, and I've deliberately put mysticism on the left-hand side, although it should be right-hand path, and occultism is left-hand path, but I'm not even going to pass that judgment either. So I just put a horizontal continuum along here. It's more egalitarian, so nothing about lower and higher. Nothing about right-hand path, which is good, and left-hand path, which is evil. So I haven't even judged that, okay? So I'm trying for the most non-judgmental, non-dualistic analysis of this, which actually Richard did provide in the end, really. Horses for courses. Basically, you do wherever you follow the path which reflects your consciousness where you're at now, and I think that's a very, very, very wise thing to say, actually, and very true, empirically true, actually, not just idealistically true, but sort of empirically. So we start off, but I do actually pass a sort of judgment on it with slack and unslack, which we'll come to in a minute. So basically, Richard starts off with a brief discussion on mysticism. It's very simple, really. This is the individual appreciation of the divine. So you're not even going to say who or what God is. You're just going to say divinitas, which means the divine. And the idea is that the individual, through introspection or through observation as well of this world, and through inner vision, spontaneous or cultivated, comes to an appreciation of that which lies beyond, which is the divine. And it's a direct experience. You don't need any religion or priest or guru or anything, although gurus may be involved, of course. You may be in the presence of a guru and receive direct experience of the divine as a result of being inspired by the guru's presence or the guru's teaching in some way. Or teacher, I suppose I just call it teacher. Guru just means teacher. And mysticism is really straightforward and direct, and there's nothing in the way. The only clouds in the sky are the clouds that you put there through your greed and fear, and through your concern for the worlds, finite worlds of the demiurge. Through meditation, those clouds disappear and you can see the sun beyond. It's as simple as that, really. Or maybe you just look at a leaf and look at the veins of the leaf, and there we are, Or you look at a tree or anything, and you just, there we are. Or look at a wall, and you're just there, you just, well, you don't go there. You go into oneness, which is everywhere, nowhere, etc. You go into all the categories. So that's mysticism. And then Richard also defined esotericism in a very excellent way. He said, he quoted the Bible, said, in my mansion there are many rooms. So you can imagine going into this mansion, this big house with lots of rooms in it. And you're going to pass you're going to enter the house from the main porch, as it were, and you're going to go from one room to the other, and you're going to experience everything in those rooms in an egalitarian way. I mean, each room will hold its fascination, its mystery, its moment, as it were, and each of the rooms is spiritual. So the whole house is spiritual, and all the rooms are spiritual in the house, and the Holy Spirit is present in each room. In the very fabric of the house itself, I suppose, the very building materials, the very uh, everything that kits out the house, you know, all the curtains and carpets and paintings on the walls and everything that you see there and experience there, that's all going to be part of the Holy Spirit, the action of the Holy Spirit and the house of the Lord. And I suppose the thing is that each room possibly reflects your own self as well. So by going to each room, you're also exploring your own self, your own subconscious, and that's all part of your self knowledge and the knowledge of soul, sort of juxtapositions or interrelates in some way, or corresponds to each other in a way that I don't really particularly understand myself, really, which perhaps nobody really understands. But esoteric, so you're traveling, or you're going along a path, and you're traveling along a path like Pilgrim's Progress in John Bunyan, and you're experiencing various things along the path which teach you about yourself and teach you about the fetters of yourself and the fetters that keep you in the finite worlds of the demiurge, you see. So esotericism, self-study, self-knowledge, knowledge of soul, knowledge of God, through the experience of ritual, of symbols, all the things like that. Using your mind, using your imagination, using directed meditation, path workings. Again, could be in a group, could be under a guru. It would depend, or yourself, you know. Um, the only thing about it I would say is be careful about going into this house. You want to make sure that you come out of this house again. So after each session, you do want to come out of the path or the directed meditation or path working and ground yourself by eating something or doing something in the garden or going for a jog or whatever. Make sure you're grounded when you come back out. Because otherwise you might, especially if you're like me and I'm all in the head, and things get a bit kind of like heady, literally heady. So you want to watch for that. And now we come to the third of Richard's categories, which is just generally occultism. And I've broken it down into a few categories here as well. Before you get to occultism, you get to what I would call sanctification. Which is basically where you take a mundane activity like sexual intercourse or eroticism, and you make it sacred. So I have here sex magic, and sex magic is basically, I mean, sex magic can, of course, go winging its way into occultism and sorcery, but there's a higher sex magic, which is supposed to make sex sanctified, and make it sort of represent the house of the Lord. So you're taking an experience which is mundane, which is lower worlds, I suppose, to put it in that way, and you're spiritualizing the activity in such a way that you're creating this mansion out of the sexual activity, for example. But I mean, it doesn't have to be sex magic. It could be just ritual, you know, higher magic, higher rituals, the higher rituals of Arthur Waite or whatever. It doesn't have to be. So I suppose another category here would be high magic, which you could put it there, you know. And high magic would come under sanctification, where you take, you know, lighting a candle or casting a circle or doing a chant, and you're sanctifying the material matter and making it a spiritual experience. And sex magic, you're also doing that. But of course, you know, you've got to be careful with sex magic because it's such a powerful magic that it could take you either way. It could take you into obsession and craziness, or it could take you into spirituality. So that's the thing about sanctification. I mean, you know, there's stories of people eating the teacher's excrement, and that becomes a sanctified activity. But it also surely is a bit of a dangerous activity as well, because you might get some infection from the excrement, and you might become very ill with it. Or maybe that's all part of the sanctification, I don't know. And I've also put stage magic here, because stage magic is interesting, because on the symbolic level, sex magic could be, conjuring or stage magic, or perhaps there's a bit of sexiness to it as well, with the sexy girls in attendance to the magician, usually a male, but some female stage magicians are very good as well. But it could be like, you could look at it as an allegorical, in the allegorical sense, misdirection, things like that. You could take it that the magic conjurer is misdirecting you, and this is a symbol of how we can be misdirected in life. So that's kind of, there could be moral lessons to be learnt from observing these magic tricks. And sometimes, the magicians, they coat their tricks in sometimes sort of philosophy. Like I remember one magician. He had this like little tube, and he had these beans or something, and he put these beans into this tube, and he said, this represents birth, maturation, old age, and death, and then he said they're all linked together with a thread of consciousness and with life, and then he took out all the beads, and they were of course strung together, but I thought that was, gosh, who did that? Famous magician did that, English magician. Anyway, forgotten what his name was now. Anyway, so he sort of told a little parable, I suppose, whilst doing the trick, and that would be kind of good as well. So that's sanctification, of something mundane like stage magic, which and a lot of the stage magicians are very interested in philosophy, Rosicrucianism, Freemasonry and things like that. They look upon it as on the symbolic level only. They don't, obviously they don't believe in metaphysics, but they do believe in symbols and the power of the mind over matter, and through misdirection, through all the tricks that magicians have up their sleeve. It shows that we're very vulnerable to suggestion and what they call conformity in psychology and things like that. So, they're very interesting. They're not sort of charlatans exactly. I think that they're very interesting people, and sometimes on a personal level they're very interesting people as well. Anyway, so now we come to basic occultism. And Richard, he mentioned there was two explanations for occultism, and he also reminded me actually that Goetia is the ancient Greek word for sorcery. So goetic demons and the study of goetic demons and the use of goetic demons is sorcery. Obviously, you're compelling a spirit to do your bidding. Richard pointed out that this is a chaotic way of working, and you never quite know, and the spirit doesn't want to be compelled, so it gives you the finger, and makes everything go wrong for you. So there's hilarious stories about that, and some not so hilarious stories about that. Now, of course, and the other way is like, he said the modern theory to explain it is that there's sort of this kind of stuff, astral light, and astral light is sort of like a putty, that you can create shapes with and impressions with objects and with your hand, you see, which is a very interesting way of explaining it, a little bit bordering on the metaphysical, I would say, really. So occultism is going into the kind of like, this is real, lads, sort of thing, Lots of different types of occultism, of course, including sigil magic, and a discussion of the way corporations perhaps use sigil magic to make people buy their products and services, which would be conjuring, which would be sorcery, of course, and under that definition. And then you're going, and I also put a different I added a category myself here, which is demonism or Satanism. I mean, Richard did talk about it, but not terribly in a way that didn't scare people too much. But basically, demonism and Satanism. I mean, the actual Satanism that is demonistic. Well, and a good example of that is actually a Nazi concentration camp. And I don't know, is it Joseph Mengele? I think, was he in Auschwitz or Birkenau? Some Auschwitz, maybe, I think. And of course, they've soon discovered that if you're going to make Jews into cabbages on legs, if Jews really have absolutely no moral ontology at all, that they're just things at best and demonic entities at worst, then he discovered, and a lot of SS officers discovered, that you literally have the power of life and death over these things called Jews. And, you can do literally anything to these people. Well, they're not people anymore, they're just things. And he did experiments on them, and he did psychological experiments of various kinds as well. You literally have the power of life and death as if you were God, basically. And you see a lot of this in activities of psychotics, serial killers. They play out their various psychological, almost creativity, almost they're creative in the way that they torture and kill people. But the big thing about it is that they believe that they are God, that they have the power of life and death over people. And indeed, I suppose there's lots and lots. You don't have to be a psychotic to believe that you have power over people and you can take with one hand and give with the other. I mean, to a degree, I suppose we're all doing that with each other, as we're paying like parent figure, in a relationship, you can be like the father or the mother or the son or the daughter. You can have power within any relationship with anybody or any group, you see. And lots of groups obviously have power games going on where they have this kind of feeling of life and death over people. But in the Nazi concentration camps, that was an extreme example. But Satanism and demonism, this is where you emulate the power of the demiurge. You decide that you literally you can become God. And so you get your person, you get your victim, and you exercise the power of God over that person. But we won't go into too much that because it really is pretty stomach wrenching, sickening kind of thing. I mean, I suppose we're sickened by it because we recognise actually that it's a bit of a mirror unto ourselves, and we could all exercise that horrible power over people if we wanted to, and to a degree we all do. So I think a lot of people hate Satanism and demonism because in fact it's a sort of an extreme example of who you are, you know. I mean, obviously, we're not all like Joseph Mengele, but we could also all become like Joseph Mengele, and other SS officers in Auschwitz and Birkenau and all those, Peter Munde, and we could all become like that. So a lot of people hate Satanism because it is like a mirror onto the consciousness, and as William Blake says, evil has a human face. So that could be your face, or my face, anyone's face. We are all capable of doing these things. And then finally, on the right at the end, you've got superstition, rubbing the lucky Buddha, throwing salt over your left shoulder. All these kind of literal superstitions. I suppose you could say even Christmas is a superstition as well. People sort of have this idea: if I don't light the Christmas tree lights, something unpleasant might happen to me. I've got to keep this ritual going year after year because I'm sort of making good luck for myself and my family and my community. So you get all this superstitio, as it was mocked in the early Christian days. And in fact, obviously Gnosticism doesn't have much to do with all this stuff, which is called left-hand path, because and the left-hand path actually extends all the way up to esotericism, really, because the left-hand path means that well, actually it's all left-hand path right up to mysticism, and I'll explain why very briefly and why that is in a minute. Well, and I'll do it now actually, because and I've got here exoteric religion. It's right hand path, so it's claimed, because you have faith. You're just waiting for God to come back. You're waiting for God to perform miracles. You are not doing anything. Okay, you are not meditating or praying for illumination. Illumination comes from God. It's like, don't call us, we'll call you, kind of principle. So the Great White Brotherhood, you can't do anything to get the Great White Brotherhood to come to you, or to get God and his angels to come to you, or to make the second coming happen, because that would be left hand path. That would border on black magic, actually. Making the second coming come back, making it happen would be evil, actually. You know not the time or the hour of God's return. So don't think that you do. You don't know the mind of God, and you can't find out the mind of God. You can't penetrate the mind of God in any shape, way, or form. Okay. So your right hand path is where you are totally passive. Okay. Whereas left hand path, you are to a degree active. Well, there are degrees of activity, you see. Mysticism could be fairly passive, or it could be fairly active, as in the case of esotericism, you see. When you're going into this mental castle or whatever, and you could be being more active by doing that, by directing your imagination, or focusing your imagination under will, to achieve a certain result, which is illumination or self-knowledge. So that's it's all left-hand path, and esotericism, but right up to mysticism, that you could argue is left-hand path, but there's a grey area between left and right-hand path, and some people say there actually isn't any dichotomy between these paths whatsoever. And indeed, in exoteric religion, you have a lot of superstition, occultism, sanctification of various activities that are considered mundane, sanctification of war, sanctification of regiments, the regimental colours in the Church of England churches, mundane activity of war, but given a sort of sanctified view by the Church of England. It's all there, including actual superstitious activity or belief. So again, fuzzy figures, but so is mysticism good? Is superstition evil? Superstition and occultism arises from fear and greed. So does sanctification, and a certain amount of fear and greed and delusion. I would argue as well, like sex magic could be a sort of delusory belief that you can sanctify something like sexual intercourse, or anal intercourse, or something like that. Notice I'm afraid I don't like anal intercourse. I don't believe Ordeal X is anything other than a dangerous sexual practice. But there we are. That's just my opinion. And some people are going to throw things at the screen now. Anyway, what do I think about all these things? I personally go for the Church of Subgenius, and they have this thing called slack. And their highest moral virtue is a thing called slack. So you slack off in life. So anything which is simple, easy, well, not easy so much as simple, because simple doesn't have to be easy, actually. Simple can be difficult. Simple virtue can be very difficult to cultivate, actually. So mysticism is maybe difficult, maybe challenging, but it's also slacking off, isn't it? It's also just like releasing. It's a very sort of direct method. Whereas all these methods like, esotericism, sanctification, demonism, occultism, superstitious activities, and, obsessive doing of rituals, daily rituals and yearly rituals and all that, and stage magic and sex magic and all this kind of stuff and rituals. It's all very non-slack. It's all, you have to do so much work, don't you? And I've got lots of books on all these things, and quite frankly, I can't be bothered with any of it. I like going into the mansion. I like well, I've done that for a bit, where you visualize a mansion and you go into the different rooms and stuff like that. Oh, that's quite fascinating, but actually it's quite pointless, really. And after a while, I thought, what am I doing this for? I can just go to the divine whenever I want, spontaneously. Just do it. Simply. So I just draw a line really down here, and I think mysticism is there on that side, and that's where I slack off. But as I say, because something is simple doesn't mean to say it's not challenging. It can be very challenging. I've often come across pieces of music which appeared to be simple, but in fact were very challenging to do, and other pieces of music which appeared to be very complex, but when you broke them down were actually quite simple to figure out. That's an interesting dichotomy for a start, isn't it? Really. So I'm not saying mysticism is like easy, and you're slacking off like, oh, that's really easy. I mean, slack is kind of like, well, I just want to be bothered. I just want to go direct. I don't want to go all around the houses. I want a direct path, a straight path, just there. Whereas esotericism and occultism and sanctification and all these things are all paths. They're all going all over the place. And I don't want to be bothered with it somehow, really. I've got all these magic books and all these Crowley books, and quite honestly, I just want to get rid of the whole lot of them. I don't bother to read them anymore. I wish I could sell them, but it's difficult to sell them, and some of them are quite valuable as well. And I get a bit of money to do my music with, but I don't know. It's all so complicated selling stuff as well. I always feel like giving them away. Do you know what I mean? Because it's all nonsense. It's all, I don't know why. It's all circuitous route. It's all going round and round the houses, and all you want to do really is get into the divine. I don't even want to do mystical speculation, but this Gnostic channel is full of metaphysical speculation and symbolic talk and allegories and metaphors and symbolic language and parables and I don't know what all, when all you really want to do is just sit and look at a tree and there's the answer, isn't it? But again, it could take years. It's not simple. It could be challenging. You might have to work really, really hard to attain this simple, direct path. But it's sort of slack in the sense that it's something which you could get your teeth into without. Whereas all this non-slack stuff, all the stuff over here, like all this stuff over here, it's all like it's also involved really. It's all such a head trip, isn't it? Like and all this sex magic and stuff. I've done that really, and you've done that, worn the T-shirt sort of thing, and all the Enochian calls and stuff like that. I've done all that, but what's the point of it? I mean, I know the point of sorcery is love, luck, and loot, and getting more of it. But what's the point in that either? Really, you can't take it with you. It's all just finite worlds. It's all lower world stuff. Why bother with it? I don't want it. I mean, if I want something, I'll just get it. Using physical, mental means. Why would I want to use a goetic demon to get anything? It would only be for experimental reasons, only to investigate the occult sciences in an objective way. But having maybe conjured a demon and got A, B, Z out of it, you wouldn't want to go on doing it because otherwise you go nuts. I mean, I had two aunts who got into magic and tea leaves, and they wouldn't leave the house without doing tea leaf divination. They were obsessed with divination and magic. I mean, they were nuts. Like they were just mad by it all, and I don't want to go down that really. So, I'm going to throw all my magic books out, burn them, throw them in the sea, whatever. Like bury them. I don't care. Tear them all up and throw them into the winds. Because I just want a direct path. So I liked Richard Smoley's lecture very much. It was very helpful. Very grateful to him to clarifying a lot of my thought. But really, slack. Let's all just slack. Let's all slack off and go into the divine. Let's all give up all this rigmarole, all this sort of spaghetti living, like spaghetti esotericism almost. Let's just have a straight line. Anyway, that's just my rant.